Welcome to the Smart Charge by Ridergy podcast. This is Claudio founder and CEO of Ridergy. This is your show to learn about all things energy management and smart charging innovation for electric vehicles and fleets. Welcome to a new episode of the Smart Charge podcast. Today, we're going to Africa, to a country that is leading the way in electric vehicles, Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the first country in the world has banned ICEs, so only electric vehicles can be imported into the country. And this since last year, January 2024. This is a bold move and filled with challenges where there is no master plan still that has been developed. It was announced just in 2023. We dive deep into all the aspects of the energy system and the mobility systems, and even before that, the economic system of the country, how it's developing to adjust as well to the needs of electric vehicles with an absolute expert in development economics, Johannes Huber. He brings in several years of experiences is both in South Africa and Ethiopia, and explains to us how the situation is and what challenges are being faced and how to tackle them, and especially shares with us a few fun facts and a few interesting anecdotes from his personal life there. So there's lots to learn about the country, and one I'm already giving you before we start so that you get yourself a nice coffee. Arabica, the coffee plant, was coming from Ethiopia. So let's dive deep into this topic of the bold move to electric vehicles from a country, none others like Ethiopia. All right. Hello, Johannes. How are you today?
Very good, very good. I'm happy to be here. Thanks a lot. How are you?
Thanks. I'm also very good. Also, even though the podcast studio is a bit hot today, but we'll manage. Maybe it gives a bit of an Ethiopian feeling too, as this episode is all about Ethiopia. But before we dive into Ethiopia, to have the listeners understand more about your background, can you explain, what's your background, maybe where you grew up, and what you did so far?
Sure. So I'm originally from Lake Constance, from the south of Germany, and after high school I've been around a lot, focusing my studies on the African continent. Even though my background is economics, but always with a focus on development policy, development economics, and more recently in my master's degree, then I turned towards energy economics. But the basics are in economics. That's what I did, and through various internships or projects on the African continent, it all started with South Africa, and then I got opportunities in Ethiopia, and I sort of changed my focus from the Southern African region to the East African region. That's basically in very short how my last, you could say, 10 years or so looked like. And I'm currently, though, I currently live in Berlin again. I've been in Berlin for about 1.5 years, and I work in the energy industry now for an association, the Association of Local Public Utilities. Even though now, of course, my focus has changed a bit, but my previous job was in Ethiopia, and I used to live in Ethiopia, and I used to work for the German Development Corporation over there. That's quite a basic rundown, basically, of what the last 10 years or so looked like.
And so one step back, how did you get passionate about development economics?
That started, I would say, all back in around 2012 when I went to South Africa for the first time. And I did one of those classical voluntary services that a lot of Germans do when they're interested to do something else, not go straight to studying. And I went to South Africa with the Weltwärts program, which is financed by the government as well.
What's the program?
The program is called Weltwärts. It's from the from the Ministry for Economic Development, the German Ministry for Economic Development, and it's a very basic or very broadly used, I would rather say, broadly used program by a lot of young Germans that are sort of interested to go abroad. The name is Weltwärts.
All right.
Exactly, and that's how I got interested. That's basically what led to my bachelor's degree in economics and development, and I sort of just stayed in the field, I would say, yeah.
Got it. But so you found this program after something drove you to that program in the first place, right? To do the voluntary work in South Africa. Was there anything that triggered that you wanted to go?
I wanted to go and see something else, I think, and I started to look for different things, and I did go abroad during high school as well. I went to the US for an exchange for 6 months. I did a small exchange to Egypt even. I think it was grade 10 or 11. So I did get interested in sort of going elsewhere before, and then I basically just looked for something to do after high school for a year before going to university.
Understand. And so after South Africa, you said you went to Ethiopia. There was
Right. I did a couple of things in South Africa during my bachelor's, which was mostly a semester abroad, 1 or 2 internships, and then I applied with GIZ and the German Development Cooperation. Exactly. Yeah. And there was a position in Ethiopia which was quite matching to my studies at the time, which was in organizational development. I have to say my studies were in economics, but the faculty or the program also focused on institutions. That was quite fitting because the internship that I then got at GIZ was on organizational development, so the topics were quite matching, and that's why I got that one in Ethiopia, I would say.
Okay, and what was the mission about in Ethiopia? What did you have to do?
Ethiopia was so GIZ is organized in projects abroad, and in a lot of countries GIZ has country offices. Ethiopia is a bit more special because Ethiopia you sort of can compare with is sort of the Brussels of the African continent.
Oh, is it? It's a funny.
Right.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Sort of. I mean, you have the African Union in Ethiopia.
So the headquarter of the
Exactly.
African Union is in Addis Ababa.
Exactly. The commission of the African Union is in Addis Ababa.
Interesting.
So GIZ not only has a country office, but also a liaison office to the African Union, and that's as well a project office, and that's where I used to work. And the project was basically on organizational development, meaning trying to, implement different projects to help the commission to do their work better, more efficient. That's in easy terms.
Got it.
Well,
Did you know anything about Ethiopia before going there, and what were your first impressions?
To be very honest, not a single thing. Not a single thing. I thought to myself when I got the job, oh wow, I'm going to Ethiopia, I guess. I started to research a little bit, but I had no idea what to expect. And in my young mind, I would say, I sort of thought it's gonna be a bit similar to what I saw in South Africa. So I might be able to use some experiences from South Africa and Ethiopia. I have to say, nothing whatsoever.
Complete different world.
Complete different world, complete different culture. I just applied, and I applied out of the blue, and I went into cold water, you can say, for my personal experience. Yeah.
And what do you remember were the first things that really shocked you or impressed you or were surprising to you?
I remember the day of my arrival quite vividly. It was in the middle of the night. In Ethiopia, usually the international flights that come into Ethiopia always land around midnight, or they land when it's still dark, and you basically have to take a taxi to your location. Of course, I arrived. There was a taxi driver who was supposed to pick me up with very little English, and drove me to some guest house. And I remember that, you got there from Germany. I got there from Germany. I went into the guest house, and there was no electricity and no water in the beginning, because at that moment it was simply out. A thing.
Blackout?
There was a local blackout. Maybe
Brownout, maybe even.
You never knew exactly what the problem was. It might only have been the house. It might have been a couple of houses around. I also have to say, in the last couple of years, it has become a lot more stable. But it was a daily thing when I used to live there.
It was back in which year?
I lived in Ethiopia. I arrived for the first time in 2018, and I left in 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the time frame. So of course, a completely new world, and then I didn't know the language. I didn't know anything. I didn't really have a way to get around, and it was sort of those first couple of days to sort of try and go outside and just to be around and try to get a couple of basic things, food to cook with, and those just a very different world, and try to do the basics that you also do in Germany, just in a very different world.
Got it. And in which ways was Ethiopia different to South Africa, based on your experience?
Well, first of all, South Africa has quite a lot of basics that just work. It's a bit more developed. You do have electricity and water supply that usually works, and it's. I mean, that's one thing that you do realize, but culturally, it's a huge difference. The Ethiopian culture is extremely different from of course the South African culture, and it's a very distinct and interesting one that I would say is less comparable to countries like South Africa or Kenya or Tanzania, which I see more similarities to South Africa compared to the Ethiopian culture. Yeah.
Can you give one example, just to make it a bit more tangible?
In my experience, in how I view it, Ethiopians are quite respectful, like extremely respectful, and they also keep a distance, and that's what I felt in daily life a lot. I could feel that there is definitely interest towards foreigners, but sort of the respect was there, not to sort of go in your way into your space. That wasn't a thing at all. So you could walk around, of course. Of course, you were always a person of interest, because you were from somewhere else, obviously. But it was not at all that anyone would go in your way. It was rather very helpful when you ask people, but no one would, for example, ask you, or little people would ask you if you needed any help.
Got it.
So that was sort of the main difference that I experienced throughout my whole time.
Interesting.
Ethiopia.
And before we move to the big topic of today as well, related to e-mobility and energy, and deep dive into that as well. Just first on the GIZ, again a bit more on what you did there. What was the main outcome of your 3 years? What were the interesting projects that you did that you want to highlight?
Well, but I was working on one project. Every project is usually, of course, there's always differences in project to project, but usually a project is around 3 to 4 years. And my time there was pretty much 3 years. So I was there for one project phase, and we the project we implemented was on human resources and finances, and my focus was on financial development, and that basically included working with the finance department on how to increase the budgeting process. So at the end of the project phase, we had developed a way on how to in the future do a better job on the budgeting process. Sort of, you can think of a manual, that sort of was there to try and harmonize the whole process across the Commission of the African Union.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, that was pretty much the project. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that most listeners might not know so much about Ethiopia in general, maybe you can give some, based on what you know,
Sure.
the core indicators of the country, so that people get a grasp and feel about which size of country and so on we're talking about.
So Ethiopia, to my knowledge, I don't know the specific numbers, but to my knowledge, we have around 120 million people in the country. So
Much larger than Germany.
quite large. Exactly. The size of the country is also larger. It's, I would say, about 2 times, maybe 2.5 times of Germany. But it's also organized in a federal way. So you have federal states, like in Germany, and you have a federal government, like in Germany as well. So you have the regional governments and the federal government. The regional governments and the regional states are quite strong in like how they do things, and they, for example, they have their own police on the local level, and then they have the federal police. That's a similarity to Germany as well. On top of that, Ethiopia is quite interesting when it comes to the climate. I always find you have mountains that go all the way up to about 5,000 meters.
5,000.
It's really, really high mountains. And then you have a very low point, which is minus 150 meters below sea level.
Oh, minus 100.
Even minus, yeah.
Is that like the lowest point on Earth or something?
Not the lowest point on Earth, but if I'm not completely mistaken, it is or might be one of the lowest points on the African continent.
Wow. Does it have a name?
It's called the Danakil Depression.
Oh, interesting.
And it's in the north east of the country, very close to the Eritrean border. So you can imagine, with these differences in altitude, you get a lot of different kinds of climate. The capital, for example, is on 2,300 meters.
Addis Ababa.
Addis Ababa, exactly. So it's quite one of the 5 or so highest capitals of the world.
Interesting.
Which also means you have like temperatures that don't go completely crazy in either ways or in either direction.
Makes sense.
So yeah, that's quite interesting about Ethiopia. Yeah.
And economically speaking, I know it's the origin of coffee is I think the coffee plant comes from Ethiopia, but I think the coffee industry might not be as strong as it was still. But maybe you can also elaborate on other economical strengths of the country.
Sure. That's a topic that's also already connected to our big topic today, which is interesting to go into it. Coffee is the main export, the main thing that Ethiopia exports.
Still today, okay.
It is, yeah. I mean, they have a couple of other agricultural products that they export. For example, sesame is, I think, probably the second biggest. I think the second biggest good, yeah. But coffee is still the first, and then some other agricultural products that they also export. There is not a big other branch or sector of production that Ethiopia exports. A little bit of flowers as well.
Right.
But Kenya is doing, I think, a bigger part, but Ethiopia is also doing some parts of flower production and export. But that's sort of the economy. So A lot of people that don't live in cities, 120 million in the whole country, they're not all going to live in the capital or in other cities. They live in rural areas of the country. They do subsistent farming. So there's not a lot of there's not a lot of production that you would use outside these villages. So when it comes to the rural areas, also a lot of poverty is still seen around. As well, you can discuss the whole thing on poverty. How poor are people that actually, live in a village and can produce everything they need for themselves.
Yeah.
But of course, with climate change and all of that, the food that they are able to produce is also becoming less and less and less, and then it's not enough anymore to feed everyone. And then, of course, you definitely can talk about poverty. Yeah.
And within the African continent, is Ethiopia in the average, let's say, of the poorest or among the richest countries in the continent, or what do you know?
It's not among the richest countries of the continent. I'm not sure whether you would call it extremely poor when you look at other African countries, but it's probably poor to middle somewhere compared to other countries on the continent. But the richest, definitely not.
All right. And talking energy then, what's the energy production and the energy grid data that you can share?
Sure. So energy in Ethiopia comes mainly from hydropower. Ethiopia has built or is still in the process of building the so-called Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is a huge dam
on the Nile.
On the Blue Nile, exactly. It's the size of it. If you use it, apparently, if you use it at full capacity, it can produce somewhere around 15 terawatt hours per year of electricity.
Yeah.
And that's enough to power the whole country. Ethiopia has a demand of around 12 to 13 terawatt hours per year currently. So if you use the dam at full capacity, you would be able to produce all the electricity needed. But of course, right now, the dam is not completely finished, to my knowledge. And
it's operating, yeah? It's
operational, but not all turbines. So I think you have a total of around 14 turbines. The person I spoke to, the interview that I had.
Maybe you can also share who that was.
I've had an interview with the World Resources Institute, and one of their experts on electrification of basically of the roads. Or of cars and trucks and buses and so on. One of them, he shared a couple of things with me and gave me also an update. I had a very good conversation with him. And he told me that according to official data, 2 turbines are running. 2 turbines out of 13 or 14 is, of course, not a lot. I found a couple of different sources online that said maybe it's already 5 or 6, but I'm not sure on how much production there is right now.
I see.
But Ethiopia does get most of its electricity from hydropower today.
Most? That means that there's other sources too?
There is a little bit of wind and a little bit of old oil power plants. Yeah, but hydropower is supposed to be the big thing for the future.
Also, okay. And do they have solar at all?
Not much. That might be part of the strategy to bring in more solar, especially also in the city. Since when we talk about electric vehicles, it would be great to have solar on people's houses to charge them. But currently not something significant.
I see.
Yeah,
and gas and oil resources and coal, do they have any in the country as like their own resource?
I'm not completely sure on how many gas or oil resources they have, but Since they're focusing on hydropower, I would believe it's probably not enough, not a lot, because they're trying to become more independent with their general energy production. And that's where they're turning to what they have in the country, which would be hydropower. Yeah.
So now one of the exciting or very maybe surprising facts that's also one of the key reasons we're talking in this podcast about Ethiopia is, and making a deep dive, is the fact that it's been the first country in the world that has banned the sale of new ICEs, and so therefore choosing EVs before any other country, even before Norway, which is probably the one that people have in mind when they think about EV leadership. How was your experience in Ethiopia in terms of mobility? Let's talk first in general about mobility, and then we can switch gears and see how e-mobility is then lived and viable in the country, and what are the hurdles to make it successful. So mobility in general, what was your personal experience, and also what have you observed, how people, how does it, for example, differ from a country like Germany?
Sure. So mobility is organized, public transport, let's start with that, is organized around minibuses, small Toyota minibuses that can seat around 15 people. That's something very typical you find in a lot of African countries. But they also have quite a large fleet of buses, which is something then organized by the city of Addis Ababa. And then on top of that, when it comes to public transport, they have a sort of, you can call it, city line. They call it the light rail, comparable to, I don't know, in Berlin, the S-Bahn. Not really tram, something more like S-Bahn. An underground, but it's above, something like that. And it was built by Chinese investors. I'm not sure when, let's say 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. It was already around and operational when I came. And that was supposed to sort of also bring the city forward on public transport, because the city, of course, people come into the city all the time, so it grows when it comes to population, but the infrastructure of the city sort of lagged behind. They're investing a lot currently to actually meet the demand that the city has. But that's why there's also not really official numbers, even though when you Google, when you go on Wikipedia, I'm sure they say numbers around 3 to 4 million, but I would say it's much further up, because people enter the city all the time, every day. Yeah.
So much bigger than Berlin.
I would say so in terms of the population. Yes. Yeah. So that's one part, public transport. Privately, of course, there is small private cars that a lot of you see a lot of these cars that look like a Toyota Yaris. It's called Toyota Vitz. It's a very popular car in Ethiopia. Easy to import, easy to get spare parts for. So that's a very popular car. And they also have something like Uber. They call it Ride, and it works pretty much the same. You have an app.
It's a company called Ride.
It's a company called Ride, exactly. It was started by, as far as it was a startup a couple of years ago, and very successful. And as far as I know, they started, and they probably still are, an all-women company.
Interesting.
So quite an interesting, super successful company nowadays. So that's also that also adds to how you get around in the city. And then, of course, in the rest of the country, so I would say there's a big gap between Addis Ababa as a city and the rest of the country, where, yes, you do have transport that goes from cities to cities through the countryside, but Ethiopia focused also a lot on building small airfields, so they can basically offer their population to get to all the different places in the country by plane.
It's quite unique, I guess, and at least I didn't hear that before.
Yeah.
And is it cheap as well? But planes usually.
Relatively.
Yeah.
There's two different prices. There's a price for Ethiopians, and then there's a price for internationals. I'm saying this because there is a price for people that have the Ethiopian citizenship or that are basically allowed to live there long term. But then tourists pay a higher price.
Still, that must be subsidized somehow, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Heavily. Yeah. I mean, you pay a flight might be as cheap as Ryanair in Europe, which is very cheap for the African continent because flights usually are not very cheap. And then still, it's a big privilege to be able to fly in Ethiopia. With
Usually, the very poor would take a bus still.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And is there like a train system, intercity?
No. No. There is one train that goes from Addis Ababa to Djibouti. It really depends. Takes 12 hours, 14 hours, 15, depends. Depends how the ride goes, I guess. But that's quite a comfortable one. Was built by Chinese investors as well. So the Chinese are very big in investing in Ethiopia. Different big infrastructure projects. Yeah.
Interesting. So the roads, I imagine, as well, being like in many other countries, the Chinese have built roads as well.
They've renewed some of the roads. Chinese investors, as well as Ethiopian investors. So they usually share it. Some of the roads are in great condition. Some of the roads are in tough conditions as well. And there is the big road that Ethiopia depends on between Addis Ababa and Djibouti. So the country, the imports of Ethiopia basically all come through the port of Djibouti.
Yeah, because they don't have access to sea.
They don't have access to sea, exactly. So the only port that they have access to, or sort of that they are using, is the port of Djibouti. So all the trucks that come with the containers have to take a certain route. And that road is, of course, heavily used and therefore, torn down. Not well maintained.
No,
that's
the opposite. Okay,
it's the opposite because there are so many trucks every day. Even though you would renew the road, it wouldn't take long for it to be torn down again.
I see. Yeah. And in terms of private ownership of passenger cars, given also the economic situation of the country, I imagine it's a very small minority that owns a car.
I would say so, yeah. Of course, again, big gap between Addis Ababa and other regional bigger cities compared to the countryside. But yes, it's definitely, I don't know what the numbers, for example, are for Germany. I don't know how many.
In Germany, we have about 50 million cars.
50 million, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a one ratio of 1 to 1 of the population, but still it's quite
high,
significant in the world in the wheelchair.
I don't know the ratio in Ethiopia, but I would be surprised if it would be anywhere close to that. Yeah.
And so moving now to e-mobility, I guess that's also the reason one would be surprised. How are they coping now with the switch to e-mobility in your knowledge? So based on the conversations you have had, also the experience you've had, how does it work in practice? I imagine, so from my experience, you have lots of second-hand vehicles usually being bought in Africa. How is such a ban now of ICE lived in practice, and what challenges occur, and then also we will move to how are they solving these challenges?
Yes, so it was quite a drastic move, of course, to say, you know what, January 2024, we completely ban the import.
Maybe also the background of the move? Yeah.
The background, there is a lot of reasons, but basically the big thing that I already mentioned before is we want to be independent. Because with internal combustion engines, what you need is fuel. Ethiopia doesn't have fuel.
Right.
They have to import the fuel, which needs a lot of dollars to do so, which they also don't have. So they're trying to become more independent when it comes to energy, as well as use their precious dollar resources, reserves, for other things that they really need it for. And of course, electrification is then one strategy to get there one day. Now, the implementation of that strategy is quite drastic compared to, what do we discuss in Germany? Let's try to sort of slowly phase out
2035.
2035, exactly. In Ethiopia, it was January 2024, and I think they announced it a year before, something like that. Quite drastic. And an import ban in Ethiopia basically means a ban because cars are only imported. So there's there's only production. There's production. I think there might be a very small part of the production in Ethiopia, but most cars are imported.
So is it then only related to the import, or is it also related to the production in Ethiopia, the ban of ICEs?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that.
Can fact check that later.
We have to fact check that. But import ban is
already, it's the bulk of the...
Exactly, it's the bulk of it, yeah. So those are sort of the reasons behind it. Behind the whole move. There was another directive a couple of years earlier that banned the import of cars that were older than 5 years. I would have to fact check that as well, but something like that. So they tried to only get in newer cars, but still ICE cars. And then they did that very drastic move towards complete.
And are we talking cars only, or also other types of vehicles?
Other types of vehicles. They say the internal combustion engine.
As a whole, wow.
As a whole, so meaning buses, minibuses, which is, of course, I can imagine how much that will impact, for example, taxi drivers, not the ones that we talked about, the RIDE project. Because they would get their cars for their drivers, but the traditional taxi drivers that they don't even earn enough money to fill up a full tank, and then let alone buying a whole new car, is going to be very difficult.
And so let's talk all the challenges so that we have a nice mountain to climb, and then maybe we'll find some rope or other means to climb it better. So what other challenges do you see due to that?
I would say that the challenges, well, you have the typical challenges that you have with any EV. They don't go as far as the ICE engine cars, which is a bit of a problem for going between cities in Ethiopia, because the distances are very far, and you simply don't have charging stations in between. There is currently there are 2 public charging stations in Addis Ababa, which is
the moment we're speaking right now.
The moment we are speaking, 2 public charging stations. Which is crazy when you think about it.
So yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
People charge their cars at home.
Normal sockets or like wall boxes. Yeah.
They do implement wall boxes. I think they're running business models now where they sell cars with wall boxes, so people can charge better at home. But then, well, public charging stations, which are run by the telecommunications provider of Ethiopia, Ethio Telecom.
So there's
2 in the whole city, meaning also in the whole country.
Really? So the all the other cities don't have anything, or in the highways there's nothing?
Nothing yet, no, because it came so drastic. So they have to implement all of that first, and then that's why people are still using their normal cars, their ICE cars, but then it's only slowly changing. It's just that whenever people can, I guess they are slowly changing towards much cheaper EV vehicles. I'm saying cheaper because there is usually a very high tax on importing cars in Ethiopia.
How much is the tax?
There is different kinds of taxes. For example, you have a 6% tax on anything you sell or buy. 6%. It's not only for cars, but anything in the country. The government wants to have 6% of that. So any car you buy, you already pay a 6% flat tax on that. The tax for cars specifically differs on what kind of car it is, whether it is considered a luxury car or a car for basic human needs, so to say. So that's why I can't give you a specific figure on how much it is. I know that in the beginning of the import ban of ICE vehicles, they didn't have a tax specifically on EVs. So EVs were tax-free, basically. You had the other kinds of taxes, the 6%, for example, but then you didn't have a specific EV tax. Now they are reintroducing it slowly but surely. I think currently they're standing at 15% on top of the 6%. So you're standing at 21%, and then I think there are still some luxury taxes depending on what kind of vehicle you import. So that's the one thing. But then on the other hand, the used car market, you have to pay higher taxes for used cars, used ICE cars compared to the EV vehicles. That's why, of course, people can afford an EV vehicle much better, much easier.
So wait a second, are we talking that the used ICEs can be imported?
No, not anymore, but you have a used local market.
For the local used.
Right.
That's more expensive if you buy a used ICE in the country right now than if you buy a new EV imported.
Exactly. In Germany, we don't know we don't know taxes on used vehicles.
Right. That's why I was...
Exactly. We don't have that. I can sell my vehicle to you without paying tax.
Whereas in Ethiopia, you have to pay extra there.
You have to pay extra tax.
Interesting.
Exactly.
And do you see... So there's like this, probably one of the cheapest EVs in the world right now, this BYD Seagull.
Yeah.
Is there any trend that this is becoming super popular now in Ethiopia, or which models are they able then to afford?
I know that I'm not sure if it's this specific BYD model, but I know that they have very good offers from the Chinese market in Ethiopia. And so most EVs that you see on the road in Ethiopia are Chinese. Yeah.
And how are they thinking about solving the range and the issue and the lack of charge points, especially for these? I imagine if you live in a city and indeed you can charge at home, no problem.
Yes.
Nevertheless, for all these other use cases, we were talking about trucks for logistics goods and the buses for transporting people. And I understand we're not talking planes, right? The planes are
not talking planes.
Yeah,
no,
so
exactly.
the planes are not banned.
No.
So for the other two use cases,
Right. There is not necessarily a great solution or a solution at all yet for all these problems. When it comes to these directives, it always sounds very strict in the beginning, but then you sort of have to find your way on making, or trying to get everyone to adapt to it, or trying to make it work for everyone. So I know that you can get, for example, still special permissions. Let's call it special permissions to import vehicles when you have a very, very good reason. For example, you need it for actually delivering things between cities, and you can really prove I cannot do my job. I cannot do deliveries with an electric truck.
Right.
So that's the one thing. There are still special permissions, but the other thing is also that right now you still have a lot of used vehicles that are running, right? So people are just continuing to use that, and they just pay a lot for fuel, because the fuel prices are extremely high.
Are the fuel prices like comparable to Germany, or?
No, if you compare the fuel price. I think we are at around 120 birr. Currently, €1 is 160 birr. But you have to look at the inflation. We are at, I think, I checked today, we are at around 14% inflation in the country. When we, just to illustrate it a little bit for you, when I lived there in 2020, 2019, 2020, 2021, the fuel price was at 20 birr for 1 liter. Now we are at 120.
Yeah, it's quite a massive increase.
That's a massive increase, and also the inflation of the currency. We were at €1 to 50 birr, and now we are at €1 to 160. So, and of course, the salaries of people don't increase that much, and people make around, average people, which is the majority of the country, makes around 3,000, 4,500, 5,000 birr a month. When you have a degree, maybe 7, 8, something like that. I would say that's sort of a middle class salary. And now imagine you have to pay 120 birr of that monthly salary for 1 liter of fuel. That's insanely high. Yeah.
And why aren't there more charge points? So the telecommunications company could create more charging stations. Do you know what's holding back the investment or the number of charge points?
I guess since it came so suddenly, the ban, I guess it is because, because then the investments don't come in super quickly, and you also don't really have a great infrastructure of investors that that would be, I guess, interested in it. But those are just my assumptions. I know that Ethiopia is in a transformation, or is transforming, or trying to transform quite a lot of sectors, and I guess that this is just one sector where they need to get more financing, where they also might have discussions on, can we just give it to private companies, because Ethio Telecom is a public owned enterprise, and therefore controlled by the government. That might also be an issue. Yeah.
And grid stability, you said, has improved since you arrived in the country.
Yes.
How can we imagine the improvements, and where is it now? Like, especially considering the risk of not having your vehicle charged if the power grid is not as stable.
So the main thing, of course, was how do we get this big chunk of electricity that is produced at the dam,
which is where, by the way, so maybe you can
also. It's very close to the border of Sudan.
So in the south,
in the east of the country.
And Addis Ababa, for example, is
pretty much in the middle.
In the middle.
Yeah. Okay. So there's quite a long stretch of, I don't know, 2,000 kilometers, maybe 1,500, something like that. But that's just a guess. Something like that of between those 2 points, between Addis Ababa and the dam.
Which is in the west, no?
The dam is in the east.
It's in the east.
Sorry, the dam is in the west. Sorry.
I was going to say
in the west.
Sudan
is
like
the border to Sudan.
Right.
The border to Sudan, not far from South Sudan as well. Yeah. And the question is, how do you get the electricity from that point where it's not needed to all the points in the country where it is needed? So of course the big networks were strengthened. They replaced them. I know that as well. There was a lot of Chinese investment, but also some other international donors, and the international community gave some money to just increase grid stability. But that doesn't apply to the local level. So the substations, for example, in Addis Ababa are not as strong yet. So while they sort of have gotten a lot better when it comes to just general electricity blackouts. Of course, if everyone is now going to charge their EVs, that's going to be a lot more difficult as well.
Right.
So yes, that's a big challenge, not only producing the electricity, but also getting it to the points where it's needed.
Also, in my knowledge, Brazil, which is also having a high share of hydropower,
right,
had huge issues related to droughts, and therefore wanted to move more towards also other forms of energy, so that they don't rely only on hydropower, which as well, considering global warming, having droughts become more frequent, is also not that smart to just rely on one source of power. I'm not sure if there's any concerns that you have picked up in Ethiopia related to that.
When it comes to the dam, the specific project, not really. In that part of the country, you don't really have a problem with droughts. They have a lot of water, much more than is needed.
All right.
That's why it was, I guess, also chosen for a project like that. The Blue Nile carries a lot of water that is all sourced in Ethiopia. And that region of Ethiopia, the west, is quite green, quite lush. So water scarcity is not too much a problem in that area, but it's a problem in other areas of the country, but not where they produce the hydropower.
Well, that's good news for them then.
I guess so, yeah. Even though you can always talk about how sustainable hydropower at the end of the day is, because in Ethiopia I looked at the satellite pictures of how big the lake at the dam has gotten over the years. It's huge because it is the biggest hydropower dam in the African.
Larger than your hometown?
Definitely.
Lake Constance?
Definitely, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure. Lake Constance, that would actually be a great comparison to look at that. But I think it is larger than Lake Constance. Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
Yeah.
And what's potential do you see? So we are talking in this podcast a lot about smart charging,
Yes.
V2G, bidirectional charging, and especially applications in countries where the energy system is a bit different. Maybe there's spot markets and there's more fluctuating volatile renewables. Still, what applications, and maybe also that relates to the fact of we didn't dive into the energy system as it's structured, is from a liberalization standpoint. You can elaborate on that and,
Sure.
and how you see, or if you have even seen something already related to these topics, and what the potential would you see?
I think I can just very quickly say that the potential is probably quite huge. But when it comes to all of the things that you just described, there is not much to be seen yet. So it's the liberalization is not there. So it's one national power company that produces everything.
It produces, runs the grids,
Exactly.
and sells.
Yeah, it's all a state-owned entity.
Monopoly.
It's a monopoly, exactly. I mean, they're slowly moving in other sectors. They're moving into liberalization. For example, telecommunications. They have opened it up, so it's not only one company anymore. There's other companies investing. That might be a model in the future for electricity as well. But that's not a thing right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so just maybe for the listeners, one idea, if we had like the solar power where we were just discussing earlier at people's homes or in companies' businesses, and combine that with battery storage, or use the electric vehicles as storage eventually for times where the grids is not that stable, that opens up also opportunities to save money as a whole as well for mobility, right? And
Right.
that's
Right.
but I guess these things need to be developed just yet, and it's not straightforward
Absolutely.
to start.
No, absolutely, exactly. The question is also, is there actually a market there right now? Because what I find interesting is that you talk about this import ban of ICE vehicles, but it's very, very difficult to sort of compare the situation that you have in Ethiopia to the situation that we have in Europe or Germany. So it's a very bold move, in my opinion. But of course, when I look at my experience of the life in Addis, which was already, I've more or less only experienced the capital city. But for me, it's very, very difficult to imagine how people outside of Addis would be interested, would go into something that futuristic, I would say, because the question is there a need for it?
Yeah. As an entrepreneur, I can't help but think, oh man, that there must be a good opportunity as well for a private company to go in the market now, given that there's such a strict regulation forcing everyone to move towards electric vehicles, and you said 2 charging stations in the whole city in the whole country. It's like it's just cries for a need for somebody to finance more charging stations, or maybe even a whole ecosystem around it, offering you not only the charging stations but the whole energy management, electric vehicles, etc. But yeah, it would be also a very bold and risky move to do that, I guess.
Absolutely. Even though you might be surprised, Addis Ababa is quite a hub for startups and for entrepreneurship. Even though, there is a lot of regulation around it. People, I've experienced that there's a lot of people who have a lot of energy when it comes to this. Even though you've got the challenges in the country that you have, the energy is definitely there, and I know that, as far as I know, that like foreign investors come in and they are looking for Ethiopian partners to do investments in the different infrastructures together. So that does happen as much as possible. As much as is possible from a regulation point of view.
Is that, by the way, something that GIZ does, these type of projects, or is that, so that could be also an interesting development project for GIZ?
Yeah, for sure. In the long run, that could be definitely interesting. There is business support projects. There is all sorts of different support projects, but of course GIZ is always a partner to the government, and that's why it would always support the government strategy.
Okay,
that's the big thing for GIZ, I would say. Yeah.
All right, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yes, we did.
Thanks a lot for your time and for your insights, Johannes. I hope listeners could enjoy our podcast with a nice Arabica coffee.
Yeah, true.
Coming from Ethiopia originally, and that was one of the nice legacies of this country that definitely helped me as well to understand better and have more insights, and gave me a bit more now impetus and energy to go and visit the country and maybe even start some business there. So thanks a lot. Hopefully, the country will manage this transition and be rewarded for this bold move.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks a lot for inviting me also. This is always great to talk about these topics. So very happy to be here.
And
today.
if listeners want to connect with you, or if you have a last message for them, feel free to share.
I mean, we can of course always connect. I would be happy to continue the conversation on these topics, because I find they're extremely important. But then the conversation is not a big one about these topics. So it's always great to talk about it and to also continue to do so. Yeah.
All right. Have a great rest of the day, Johannes.
Thanks a lot. The same to you. Thanks.
And this was another episode of the Smart Charge podcast. What a fascinating background from Johannes, who early on got fascinated about development economics and brings in interesting projects experiences in South Africa, but also very international background. And then especially his deep knowledge about the country of Ethiopia. What a fascinating country, isn't it? I found it, especially the altitude differences from minus 150 meters to 5,000 meters, quite fascinating, as well as the modes of transport and the planes and how they're moving around with these planes as given the altitude differences, and how they are moving to electric vehicles in such a bold move as the first country, really trying to make an impact for their population that cannot afford these high fuel prices. And so with this abundance of renewables, and it makes just total sense. Nevertheless, it's such a challenge to build charging infrastructure, to have a grid that is reliable, and having so few charging stations in like 2 big charging station spots in Addis Ababa, in the whole country, definitely opens up challenges and opportunities to make things better. Very curious to see how this develops over the years. And I hope you learn a ton about the country and the prospects of e-mobility and smart charging, especially in V2G, that will probably be part of the solution as things advance. I'm looking forward for you to tune in again in the next episode, and don't forget to share it with somebody who might think this type of topics are interesting, and to give us a 5-star rating. Bye.